Hello and welcome to the latest GESS Talks webinar. Thank you all for joining us. Today's webinar is going to be an interesting one and all about promoting and ensuring quality practice in the early years. We've got a fantastic panel, but a few bits of information before we get underway. For all attendees, you can find the control panel on the side where there's a Q&A tab. Please feel free to ask us questions, as the panelists would love to hear your thoughts. We'll do our very best to get through them all, but if we don't manage to, the system saves them down and we'll get back to you after the webinar. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our chair and moderator, Dr. Sarah Rogers, CEO of Quest Direct Professional Services, to introduce the rest of the panel. Thank you, and over to you, Dr. Sarah.
Thank you very much, Danny, and welcome to everybody who's listened today. It's really nice to have lots of people on board. We've got a fantastic panel today, and we're going to be talking about the vital elements of good quality early years practice, which is so close to my heart as well. So we're going to cover such topics as training and qualifications, learning environment, wellbeing and leadership, and each of the panel will bring their extensive knowledge and we'll have a really good discussion. So I'd like to introduce the panel. I'm going to introduce them one by one and ask them just to tell you a little bit more about themselves as well first. So Michael Potts first, please, International Programme Manager of NCFE Cash. Welcome, Mike.
Thanks very much, Sarah. Hi, everyone. Great to be here. So I'm Mike Potts. I'm the International Programs Manager at NCFE. Just a bit of information on NCFE. You might know us from our cash qualifications within the early years sector. We are an awarding organisation, so we develop, write and certificate qualifications, and we develop the gold standard cash qualifications, those cash 3 and 5 qualifications, and that we develop in region. And yeah, really excited to talk about the quality we try and ensure with the approval of our centres and delivery of our products.
Thank you, Mike. And I've had the pleasure of working with NCFE Cash and Mike for many years now, and they certainly have played a big part in improving quality in the region. So thank you very much for that. Charlotte, lovely to have you here as well today. Charlotte is the nursery manager at CreaKids. Charlotte, could you tell us a little bit more about yourself, please?
Hi, so yeah, I'm happy to be here today, and I'm representing CreaKids nurseries and early childhood centres. So we are a Norwegian group of nurseries, and we're based in Dubai and soon in Abu Dhabi. And we are currently 4 branches across Dubai as it stands.
Great. So you're going to be giving us your experience from on the ground, aren't you? So that's really helpful. Thank you. And Fiona, thank you. We've known Fiona for quite a few years as well. It's lovely to have you here as well. So Fiona Carter, Director of Education at Wellington International, although she does travel around a little bit. So tell us where you are now, Fiona, and a little bit more about your background, please.
I do. Well, as I say, I'm in the mothership now. I'm actually in the Wellington College. But not many people will know probably that the Wellington College is for 13 to 18-year-olds. So there's no early years at all in terms of the actual host school. We do have a prep school on site. But so I look after and support and guide the quality of education in early years and primary across Wellington International. But I've just come from Wellington, China, and have been there 4 years. In terms of international schools now, we've got 6 in China. We have 1 in Bangkok. And we're very excited. We're opening 1 in India, fingers crossed and monsoons willing, next summer. So we're being reassured the monsoon will finish soon. So that's next summer. And then we're about to open, we hope in the next few years in Singapore. So lots coming up and lots happening, but I'm really interested in what's happening around the world and massively in England. I'm now back here, and it's really great to see the amazing practice that's going on, especially, I would say, in state education.
Thank you. It's certainly a very busy time, but I think education always is, isn't it? We never stop. We never rest on our laurels. And for all of us, quality means so much to us because it makes a difference to those children and families that we work with, and those best outcomes are so important for us as well. So over the last few years, we know it's been very turbulent. It's been very different in each country, different in each place. So changes have happened, maybe some better changes, some changes that we'll keep, and some changes that we'll hope, we can reverse again. So quality indicators. What Charlotte? What to you makes a really good nursery setting? What do you look for? What do you hope parents will look for?
Yeah. So I can speak obviously as a parent and as an early childhood centre manager. We could talk about this for most of the podcast. I would say particularly our learning environments is something we do really well here. Our play-based style of learning right up until KG2. And another thing is our parent relationships as well. I like to feel as though we have very good relationships with our parents. We listen to feedback, and we're always looking for ways that we can improve for the children.
Yeah, that's very important. Parents as well. Fiona, parents, that different parents in different cultures are all very different. We know that. So what do they look for quality across, or what do you, let's leave parents just for a moment. Let's think about, what do you look for quality? What's your quality indicators in your settings, as diverse as they
A real
are?
game changer for us over the last 4 years has been using the Leuven scales to their full extent. So if people don't know about the Leuven scales, they are a measure of wellbeing and involvement against a very clear set of criteria. And lots of people have heard of screening for wellbeing and involvement, seeing where a child is. But I was lucky to work with Professor Ferrer-Levers a few years ago, and we were trained in scanning for wellbeing and involvement. And I think if you're a believer that high levels of wellbeing and high levels of engagement equate to almost those maximum conditions for learning, then we use it now thoroughly, not just against individual children, but as cohorts of children, and also in terms of a learning walk strategy. And beyond that, what's, I think, really changed or really been impactful with using the Leuven scales has been that teachers and practitioners themselves scan for levels of wellbeing involvement in their classrooms, outdoors, at lunchtime, whenever. I mean, to be honest, once you're trained to scan and screen, you do it on the bus, you do it with everybody, you do it at a family party, you do it the whole time.
And they're quite straightforward scales, aren't they? They're quite easy to see, you know, how well the child is settled, how well they're involved, how well they're interacting. So it's not onerous to do that, is it?
It's not onerous at all, but I think there's something about, I'm a great believer in terms of in the governance of your setting. If they are reported at a higher level, they're taken seriously. You know, they're a form of assessment, but they're also a form of monitoring the quality of what's happening. And, you know, as we all know, you don't monitor the quality of a nursery every Wednesday afternoon. You do it all the time. And so it's not a top-down strategy. People from within are looking at it all the time. And what it also does is it's also an improvement tool. So it doubles up. The rubric serves as an assessment tool, a checker, if you like, but also as what to do next. And I think what really struck me after the training with Ferrer, and I don't know if you know, I used to work for Early Excellence for a long time, great organisation. And, you know, and I would train on the Leuven scales. But when actually working with Professor Ferrer-Levers, I suppose we learnt that a 3 or a medium level is not good enough.
Okay.
So, you know, we used to do red, amber, green, and he said amber's not good enough. For children to thrive, they have to be a 4 or a 5. Now, no child's always a 5, but you know, I use very often that heat lamp analogy, whether it's pupil progress meetings, whether it's an inspection of a school, and the children under that heat lamp, doesn't matter what they're doing. It might be formal, might be play-based, might be child-led, inside, outside. They're thriving. You're maximising their potential. The children who are really away from the heat lamp, they're the children you know. They're the one who might need lots of interventions, lots of support. But what really struck me after doing the research and the work we did with Ferrer was that those children on the edge of the heat lamp, the ones that you kind of go home and not sure whether they were here today, those children who might be compliant but actually aren't fulfilling their potential, those 3s, those medians, Ferrer and his team would say, you've got to find out whatever the hook is
to get them under the lamp.
Bring them under that lamp. Yeah. So it's been really powerful, really, really powerful.
That's a useful. I can visualize that analogy as well. So that's really useful. I use the scales, but I haven't really thought about it in that way. Mike, obviously things are changing in the UK as well, and you're very much from the qualification side. Do you see those changes, you know, coming through in your qualifications as well? Do you see nurseries or colleges who are doing the qualifications actually wanting changes in the qualifications to kind of emphasize the quality, or how do you maintain your quality?
Absolutely. So obviously NCFE and the cash qualifications, we've been kind of leading the early years framework development for some years now. And with that, what we're trying to do is make sure they're the most up to date. That is, you know, annual reviews of that, of each qualification to make sure the standards are there and we're hitting those changing requirements as they come through. And working very closely with the Department for Education in the UK as well to review, survey, speak with providers, speak with parents, find out what is needed within those frameworks and adapt and amend them as and when. to do that. But yes, things have been challenging. I think we alluded to it earlier when we were catching up. I think with the pandemic, it's been difficult for a lot of early years learners on programme to complete a lot of their qualifications, because they haven't been able to have assessments in
practice.
And this has led to some difficulties of people getting through and a shortage of staff within there. So we've been trying to support as much as we can with adaptations, with everything we can. But yes, as a provider, we want to have the most up to date, the right qualifications for the right time and the most fit for purpose. So we work as hard as we can to make sure we deliver those.
Yeah, that's really good. Keeping kind of qualifications, and Charlotte, what you said about the learning environment as well. Do you think that the people coming through that are qualified now, or the new staff coming through, have they got the right experiences? Have they got to understand what quality is? Because it's fantastic in the UAE, especially. We live in such a multicultural society with such diverse and wonderful cultures that people do come with different experiences, don't they? Have different experiences from their own childhood, their own education. How difficult is it to get that shared vision of what you want?
Going back to what I was just talking about, really, is those parent relationships and being able to listen and accept feedback, especially as the world has changed over the past few years, and understanding that the way that the world has changed, some people like the changes that have happened and some people are hesitant regarding them. And some people actually, they're keen for change and they want to make sure things move in the right direction. So for one example would be our parent meetings. I know we briefly touched on this before. For example, some of our parent meetings are they're wanting them on Zoom now, whereas before they were taking place face-to-face. Obviously, working parents, busy lifestyles, it does suit a lot more parents to maybe take it on their lunch break and take it via Zoom, avoiding the traffic, the school drop-offs, the childcare issues. There are ways forward, definitely, that have improved via COVID.
That's good. You kind of touched on technology there on Zoom there, and I can ask Fiona or Mike about this. Perhaps Fiona, technology. Sometimes I think we've opened a Pandora's box of apps for parents, and I think sometimes we feed parents too much information sometimes. And I'll show my age here, but when I used to teach, the children were trusted to us in the morning, they picked them up at the end of the day, and we had a little chat at the end of the day, and that was it, perhaps. Do you think the technology is playing the right role in our quality as we try to ensure the quality, or do you think we've gone too far the other way?
I think it's a really, really good question. I think that you hit the nail on the head to about quality. It's not about the quantity of images or photographs you send throughout the day. And, all of us as parents, if I had 5 photographs of my little 3-year-old every day, I'd love it. But then if the next day you've only sent me 3 or 2, I'd worry. And to be honest, I wouldn't judge the quality. I would just think, oh, it's my little girl again in the clay. So I don't blame parents for enjoying that. But I think it is up to us as educators to make sure that if we are sharing anything with home, it is about the process of learning. Many, many years ago in Ofsted training, we talked about remark on the remarkable. And actually, that's really what documenting learning is meant to be about, rather than this is your Now, as I've said, there's nothing wrong with that. But I think if it takes away, I think the key is if it's taking teachers and practitioners away from interacting with children, then it's a no-go. The minute you put that camera in front of a child, you're potentially missing a very magical moment of interaction. So I think that's the big thing for me.
And I have literally in classrooms seen children doing an activity, and the cat's just about to jump in. The practitioner said, "Whoa, stop!" and they've taken the picture, and the child's kind of like, "Okay." And I've also seen activities where the child was being, maybe quite disruptive, and then the minute they were good or what the behaviour they want them to, they take the pictures. So, Charlotte, does that kind of give us, is that a good use of our teachers in, using technology in that way? And
I think I can't remember who mentioned it, but definitely it's looking at it through a critical lens. And that's not to say no, but it's being reflective on it. If you're feeling like technology is improving your provision, then definitely green light. But if you feel on reflection that it's either hindering or it's not really making much of a difference to the quality, you've got to reflect whether it's really worthwhile.
Yeah. talking to practitioners in the UA, I'm hearing a lot of them are very overwhelmed by the amount of information they have to give to parents. And then when we've been doing research, it seems that parents aren't always wanting that much, and they don't always look at everything. I'm going to ask Mike with his parent hat on just for a second, please, because he's got 2 young children, one who's in nursery. Is he in nursery or in school now, Mike?
Preschool, yes.
In preschool. So do you have the apps as well? Do you look at them? And
I do, yes. Yeah, I agree with Fiona. It's kind of, when you get a few pictures a day, it's like, oh, amazing. And you don't kind of know what it is. But it is very much overwhelming. So I have my daughter, Lana, she's at a private nursery at the minute. She's in 1 day a week. So I have an app for that. And then Maxwell's starting his preschool. So I have an app for that. And there's different policies and procedures. I got told off this week because I didn't write Maxwell's names in his shoe. So there is a lot of information and a lot to give in, and you really want to do that and kind of be as kind of compliant in kind of understanding as you can. But it is, I agree. I think it's the technology should really serve its purpose and just shouldn't be used just for the sake of it. I think just switching to the NCFE side of things, I think we've been saying that. I think the pandemic probably brought through the use of technology forward by about 3 to 5 years, with providers and our centres having to adapt with that in various levels of quality, but everyone was available to go online and deliver some sort of online teaching. Or some people have more sophisticated platforms, some people might just do it that way. But you're right, it has to serve what's needed. With our qualification delivery for our quality as well, as Sarah mentioned before, face-to-face has to happen for us as a vocational awarding organisation. So for some elements, the online is great, so we can submit reports, essays if you want, even do some professional discussion, witness testimonies. However, that face-to-face observation of our early years practitioners must take place, because fundamentally our children are the most important. So we need to know that these people studying the cash level 3 and level 5 are competent and are doing things in the right way. So even though that's been challenging for us over the pandemic to get people through, it's been the right thing to do, to wait to make sure we can see that competence. And I know Sarah as a centre and a deliverer, and us as a warden organisation have had a lot of conversations about that, because we appreciate the frustration of learners not being able to get through at that time, but we also had to do the right thing to make sure that those children that are being observed and that are going to have these people that with license to practice working at managerial or educator level are competent. So it's been challenging, but the right thing to do.
It is, for me, it is all about having the right people in the right place, and technology helps those people, doesn't it? And it gives us tools to do our job, but it's still about knowing what our job is as well. Charlotte, what do you look for if you were recruiting more high quality practitioners to your lovely settings? What do you look for? What's the standard of quality in a practitioner for you?
Well, in our organisation, DIBA in general, we have something called a heart culture, which means it's that warmth, it's that approachableness, the kind-hearted way of life, really. And I think as I go to interview people and during the recruitment process, a good part of that has to be, is this the right person? And as children, are they going to find them approachable? Are they going to be warm to those children? As well as, obviously, the qualification side, the experience side, we need to know, is their personality going to be fitting right for this role?
Yeah. And Fiona, again, you've worked with a diverse staff population, student population as well. What do you look for in a staff member and you recruit?
I think, well, exactly as you were saying, Charlotte, it's about being able to build relationships with young children. It's about enjoying young children. I think we've seen lots, unfortunately, we have seen people who might be very qualified but don't seem to like children. And I think it must be a really hard job if you don't get something for being with children. I mean, internationally, of course, there's a plethora of local qualifications that, particularly as when you're a new international school, you might kind of pre-prescribe, we want people to be at this level. So to have had 2 years minimum experience, have QTS, those kind of things. But actually that doesn't always equate to a local qualification. But so certainly on paper, it's about the entry level may be different for different people. But I think as long as you've got an in-house support program, at the moment I'm writing a program for pathways for our Chinese teaching assistants. to become higher level teaching assistants and then perhaps teachers. Now, they don't have to become a teacher. What we've realised now with things like PGCEs and QTS, well, they're never going to work in England. So why do they need? They might not need QTS, but is there something we can do separately that's accredited? But it very much reflects our values. And I think that's important. What you've talked about, Charlotte, is recruiting people who reflect your values as educators. And, you know, the first thing we will ask, I would ask in an interview, is what's your image of the child? What do you think children are capable of? And if they jump straight to talk about care and having to do things for them, doesn't mean they're not recruited, but it means that we're starting from a different viewpoint, perhaps. And again, in certain countries, I'll go back to China, but in China, our Chinese primary teachers are specialists in Chinese and maths. So phenomenal specialists. But if they would like to come and be a primary school teacher or an early years teacher outside of China, they have to be taught to be generalist and teach in a co-curricular way. Because I think just quickly, I think what is good internationally is that lots of governments now, and I think the UAE has been ahead of the game here, have recognised that for international school groups to come into their country, it is very important ahead of getting a licence that you explain how you're going to support the local community to teach in that school. So you're not just kind of you plonk up this money-making machine and then don't support local educators. I
think that cultural awareness is very important, isn't it, wherever you are. How do you grow your staff then, Charlotte? How do you know recruiting? And Mike mentioned about recruitment being so important. And, we don't want that churn of staff, and we can't have that quality learning environment unless we do keep our staff, isn't it? How do you grow your staff? How do you support your staff?
I think it is always important to obviously to find out about them as an individual. So what are their personal aspirations? Whether that is to continue in their current role or whether that is to develop and grow beyond that role. Obviously being in an international setting as well, whether they do prefer to move to another country, as we've already talked about, and having the skills needed for those other growth opportunities. There are two examples that I can think of within my current company where we've had people who've grown from teachers, or they've grown from assistants into the next role, and then going from teachers to managers or other roles around the company, that they've got the flexibility to be able to train and develop.
I think keeping good staff on board is so important, isn't it? And Fiona, do your staff transfer between countries or even between settings within country, or?
Yes, much more so. And then, the nice thing is, because we're quite a young international school group, we're only about 10 years old. I mean, the school here is about 160, but as an international school group, we're not very old. And so our school in Pune, India, which will open next summer, the head of early years is coming from an amazing early years setting in Hangzhou, which is one of our schools. So yes, and the same for the junior school. So they've got that Wellingtonness about them. And it's great that they don't want to leave us, but they're kind of ready to move on because they've been in that country for 3 or 4 years. And the very nature of lots of international teachers is they like to be on the move. They like to go to different places. So absolutely, it's about retention, isn't it? And I always believe it's actually much cheaper in terms of time and money to keep people and keep them happy, things like high potential programs, than it is to re-recruit and take that risk, but anywhere, but particularly internationally. So I think they do move around. Again, obviously, so we're considering taking our bilingual model overseas, which for China. So that would be a great opportunity for our Chinese nationals to work overseas, but then come back to China and bring all that more diverse experience. So, so there's ahead of that, there's a lot of work on visas and how easy is it, and also how attractive is it? Talk about culture. How attractive is it for a Chinese person to go and live in America? Do they want to? Would they rather live in Canada? Would they,
And we talked, didn't we, a little bit before about how over the last couple of years when travel was restricted, that had a big impact on people and where they wanted to be and where they, it's all great when you can zoom around or fly around the world, but when you couldn't. Anyway, I just wanted to pick on something else you just said, please, Fiona. You talked about the Wellingtonnesses. Yes. You said it better than that. Wellingtonness.
Wellingtonness.
Right. What does, and I'm going to ask you as Charlotte in a minute as well, what it means to you, but what is your Wellingtonness? What is it? What defines you as an organisation?
I think it's a great question. It's actually one of my KPIs this year is to define the Wellington as primary. I really feel we've got it for early years. I think very much about children being independent learners, being capable learners, nurture relationships, high levels of well-being and involvement, learning environments I could go on about for the next hour, then being, well organised, aesthetically pleasing, respecting children. I think that that feeling of, and at Wellington here, I suppose when we started, it's about innovative, progressive education, but with high standards. High standards, but I suppose to sum it up, it's holistic education. Okay. But that's dead easy to say. Dead easy to say we're a holistic educator. But then from that, you've got to assess holistically, report to parents holistically. Parents want a holistic educator, or do they? So there's all that.
We're going to come on parents' expectations in just a moment, but that's so true. Charlotte, I'm going to ask Mike, I'm going to ask you in a moment with your parent hat on what you look for, because we're going to move about parents. But Charlotte, explain the CreaKids-ism. What sets you apart? What makes you different? Who are you, basically?
Yeah. So we always refer to like the DIBA way in our company, because we are CreaKids, but we have an overarching parent company known as DIBA. And when we talk about the DIBA way, again, it refers back to the heart culture. It talks about being like academically best in terms of being qualified, being experienced, but balancing that in equal measure to being that warm, playful, fun person, really, someone that children want to be around, that's motivating, inspiring.
I was asking people the other day what early childhood, was about. And to me, that word fun has to be in there as well. It has to be enjoyable. It has to be fun. It has to be a happy place, doesn't it? Because they could be living till they're 95, we've got plenty of time. We don't need to rush through it. Mike, I'm slightly skewed for you because I'm going to ask you with your parent hat on. Are your children in two different settings now? Is Lana in a different one to Max?
They are, yes. So Lana's in a kind of Busy Bees Kids First nursery at the moment. And Max has just moved into a preschool because he gets the 30 hours in the UK. You get 30 hours schooling. So he's in preschool, yeah.
What did you look for when you chose those two settings and as a parent? What was your quality indicators?
I'd say it is quite difficult working in an education setting, I think, because with it being so invested in the cash early years framework, it was very much, have you all got your license to practice? Have you got your level 5? Are we working within this framework? Which of course they are. But no, I agreed. It was all within the how are they going to socialize? How much fun are they going to be able to have? How do you develop through play? How that importance of play work that I know Janet Scott, one of our subject specialists, is fantastic on. It was everything within that, and you're right, just the feel of the place, really going in, going to a few open days, meeting the staff, hearing how they interacted. And I think you're totally right, just really seeing if they enjoyed working with children and how they interacted with the kids and how you think they were going to get that experience. So that was really important. And there was a lot of for Maxwell's second, he loves I think he's quite a naturalist, so he loves kind of being outside. He loves kind of playing within nature. So his preschool has a lovely outdoor area where there's a musical section and kind of a section for kind of mud kitchen and things like that. So that was a really important element for him as well. So it was, but very much that who was working there, how they interacted with the children, and how they were going to socialize and bring them on through play was what I was looking for.
Good. I was always told if a child came home clean, they hadn't had the best day they could have had.
I agree.
Yes. In that mud kitchen, being outside.
Yes.
So I sometimes think, I often think that we make assumptions about what parents do look for, or what is important to parents, or how much parents do know about our curriculums and what we're aiming to do and our ethos. Charlotte, what do you find? What do parents look for, and has that changed over the last few years about what for them in the UAE is a quality setting? What do they look for when they come to you?
So I'm in the lucky position where I do lots of parent tours. So I do get to touch base with not only our current parents, but also prospective parents. And I get to ask questions. They get to speak to me, and I find out a little bit more about what they're looking for. And as you say, Mike, it's definitely to do with, is my child going to be happy here? Is my child going to develop here? But there's also sort of that extra sparkle factor, because obviously being a private nursery setting, there is lots of competition, especially in Dubai. So parents are looking for something that's going to set you apart from other nursery settings. For us, I think one of those things is our outdoor areas as well. I'm a big advocate for outdoor learning. I'm very passionate about it. So one of the big selling points is our outdoor access from all of our classroom spaces. So that's something that a lot of our parents are looking for as well. We are based in Sustainable City, so it does fit in with the ethos.
You have got lovely light classrooms as well, haven't you? Lots of space. So in a purpose-built building, which is fantastic, isn't it? And that's really good. Fiona, what do your parents look like? And is that different in different places, in different cultures? You know, is there more pressure on some parents than others? Do they value early years education?
I think they value early years education. I mean, I think it's worth saying, in terms of the independent sector, and if you like, the premium school sector, they're expensive. You know, they're a lot of money, and I think people quite rightly want value for money for that. They want, you know, they want to know what the fairy dust is and what extra is given. I think certainly in our schools, including in Thailand, and it will be the same in India, less in India slightly, because most children will come speaking some English. Progress in English is very, very important. Seeing that impact quite soon. I think a slight difference in parents, perhaps in early years, is that parents are more aware of academic expectations of their children, not in a formal sense, but they expect for that to be reported on. I actually spoke to one of our Chinese deputy heads today, and I asked her this question this morning. She said they want them to have played hard. That's great. She said they want them to come home dirty after being in the mud. Now that is a big change in China, big change. And I'm not saying it's everywhere, but that's a kind of, you know, as an educator, sticking to your guns and saying, I know their new shoes are getting dirty, so please bring Wellingtons, or because we're not going to change it, we are going to do it. And so now, and that's not an old nursery, that's the expectation that children will come home, you know, they like their sense of community. I think that's important. We have friends of Wellington, and parents don't always get involved in that, but they like that. They like that community, that the children are taking charge of that community and how they showcase their work and what they do. And I think transition to school is quite important to them. I think that transition into what will inevitably be slightly more formal, they want to be reassured that if they are playing and choosing, because we deeply believe that's the best motivator for young children, even if you're tricking them that they've chosen, but that's what you're doing, then they want to know that if that's not the same when they're 7, will they cope? Will it be all right? I think
that's a big transition, isn't it, from early years into key stage 1 for many of us as well. Just going back to technology, do parents want their children using technology, Charlotte? We talked about technology kind of like for parents and communicating with parents. Do parents see that as a side? Do you know, interactive whiteboards and iPads, and do they expect children to be using that?
So I think it's hard to generalize parents. You know, parents all want different for their own children. They've got their own visions about what they want in a childhood setting, really. But I would say we're very open to listening to that. And we don't have screens in our nursery classrooms. We don't have screen time. It's not something that we do as part of our curriculum. But we are aware that with the way that the world is changing, there are underlying skills that children will begin to need to know. So, for example, in terms of before children start interacting with people in an online setting, they need to know how to interact with people, full stop, before you start introducing screens. So we feel like we need to introduce the basic skills, the fundamental skills behind things before you let them onto a device. One really amazing example that I've seen is, I don't know whether you've heard of the author Linda Lucas. She came to Dubai a couple of years ago, and she designed a way, she's a storyteller and she is a digital coding expert, and she designed a way for children to learn about coding without using a computer, to look at the ideas behind the theory behind coding, but you can introduce it to children as young as 3 years old by doing things like drawing, designing, what's another thing that she looked, critical thinking, really, without using a computer or a device. So it's thinking outside the box to look at those underlying skills without presenting children with a screen.
I think we're becoming more aware, what, as you said, what is so important is that early language, that early socialization, isn't it?
Yeah.
I certainly see that it's very heavily in the cash courses, Mike, isn't it? About making sure people get that the understanding of what is important. And yes, technology is a tool to make some of those things happen, isn't it? Do you? Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, yeah, that, you know, we are dealing with children who are digital natives, kind of almost born with a tablet in hand, sort of thing. But I think, you know, in personal time or at home, they get enough of that. So I totally agree. I think when they're in that early years setting, they should be learning how to socialize, and doing that first before they get into that, you know, the trials and tribulations of dealing within a social media and digital world and all that brings. I think, again, from a parental perspective within that self, I think within that, when Maxwell was out of nursery and during the pandemic and couldn't attend and was at home and was homeschooled at that point, it was really tricky getting him back because he was so used to just seeing myself and my partner. Even seeing his grandparents upset him because it was just such a strange transition, seeing more people in that, and it got a while back to do that, and that was such a horrible thing to see socially, that he wasn't used to seeing other people, and we really had to bring him in and take baby steps. And I think that took a lot with a lot of toddlers going back at that time. So I think Charlotte's absolutely right. I think getting them to socialize at that point initially, and then there's plenty of time for that for the digital side.
Charlotte, you talked about it a little bit earlier on, and maybe Charlotte and Fiona can both answer this one. Do parents want, you talked about technology making it easier for parents in their break times, in, you know, beginning and end of the day when they don't have to travel so much. Are there more working parents now? Are they asking for different in terms of quality of what they want? Do they now look for longer days, more provision? Do they look for either after school care or something? So I don't know who wants to answer that one first. Charlotte, do you want to answer that first? And then we'll
your bag more, Charlotte, than mine.
So I would say, especially if you are going into a private nursery setting in Dubai, we find that a lot of our parents are working parents who've gone for that option. But equally balanced, you've got parents who are just looking for an opportunity for their child to socialise outside of the home setting. I'd say, as a working parent of an early years child myself, I am looking for my child to socialise. I'm also looking for him to get into routines, looking for him to develop his own personality. And I'd say a lot of that would have been similarly to what I was looking for pre-pandemic. I'd say maybe the only differences are that you're more aware of, as Mike was saying, the gaps that you've had during those pandemic couple of years, realistically, where you are trying to bridge the gap that may have been left from periods in isolation.
Do you think, sorry, I'll just come to Fiona in a moment. Charlotte, do you think that parents, having had the joys of their children at home for however long it was, months and months, actually appreciate nurseries more now and what nurseries do?
I wouldn't like to say that, but I said our parents are very supportive, and a lot of our families who were with us pre-pandemic then returned once nurseries reopened again. So we had a strong parent support beforehand, and we still have an equally, if not more so, strong support now.
Yeah. Okay, Fiona, have your parents asked for longer days? Have they asked for changing? I mean, one of the questions I can see, we're going to go to the questions at the end of this, but talked about flexibility in programs as well. Do you have flexibility in your programs?
We don't, because remember, we're school-based in terms of our offer, but there are after-school clubs, CCAs as we call them. Mm-hmm. And it's also slightly different in Southeast Asia because home childcare is a lot cheaper. And certainly in China, it's very traditional for grandparents not to work and look after children. And actually, if you were asking me to the change in somewhere like China, it's that more parents are choosing early years settings, much to grandparents' dislike sometimes, because they really think that they should be, they should be the ones looking after them. But parents are opting for situations where children can take risks, where they can socialise, because they feel they're a little bit over-nurtured at home. So I think it's slightly different when you're in countries where having full-time nannies, IEs as we call them, people who can help, whereas in England that would just, and in most of Europe, that would be so expensive. that it's not what normally happens. I mean, I think the technology side of it for parents, as a parent, I mean, mine's at university now, it's actually, now that we know it can happen, it's as easy for me to have a parent consultation with her teacher online and not have to worry about getting there, or I can do it from anywhere in the world, than it is to have to be there and then not speak to the teacher. So I do think if it's given us anything, it's that quick responsiveness of being able, and for the students as well, actually. And as for older students.
We certainly are in a different place. And I know Mike's having problems with his camera, and he looks lovely in pink though, Mike. So that's okay. We can still see you in here. That's good. So thinking about a bit wider, over the last few years, I hope and I believe that early years as a whole, as a profession, is seen more as a profession. We are being valued as a distinct and the most important, in my opinion, the most important stage in a child's education. And over the last few months, I've been involved with the Khalifa Awards for early years based in Abu Dhabi, which has been brilliant. So to have that recognition that early years is so important. Do you see that recognition coming through in the wider community? And are there any challenges to that? Do people perceive us in the way we want to be perceived, for instance? So I don't know, Fiona, do you want to start with that one, and then I'll come to the other two?
I think it's quite different. Again, going on to my world at the moment, it's still quite challenging in through schools. In K-12 schools, as we would call them, it's still almost always the master or the principal might be a senior school person. Not always, but often. And so there is still, I think still early years has to really raise its profile sometimes. And if you've got really strong practitioners, then they can do that, and leaders. I think it's about the original organisation charts of the schools almost, as the early years person, do they have equal status on the SLT as the head of senior school? And if not, why not? So I think there is still, I wouldn't use the word prejudice, but I think there's still a fight to be had.
Some resistance there.
Yes, and almost unintentional. Almost not known. Although I will say, I think, sometimes, and then you also hear lots of senior school people will say, I don't know about early years. And of course, that gets me grumpy. So I think, well, find out then.
I think early years scares them a bit.
I've never taught GCSE, but I found out about it. So
I always remember my children both grew up in the UAE. Both of them went to the same very, very good school in Dubai. And I remember speaking to the head teacher there, and they had great subject teachers, great teachers. They did great A levels. They went to university, very successful. But he actually said to me, "I wish that my teachers knew what your teachers do about how children learn." And I could always remember coming back and my daughter saying to me in a history lesson at A level and in year 13, Mr. Such and Such has said we're not going to be as good as the ones last year. And she said, "Does he know that doesn't motivate us, Mum? That's not the way to motivate." Anyway, Charlotte, do you think the UAE do you think as a whole, as a community, we are recognising the importance of early years?
I think a lot depends on your setting as well. I think, as Fiona was saying, I think sometimes in the K-12 sort of system schools, sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes early years can be seen as a bit of the underdog, really. And as you were saying, Fiona, I think when you've got really strong practitioners who are not afraid to have their voices heard, it makes a big difference. But also, as well, that SLT team does need to have early years experience, as you say, as I feel like a lot of school leaders do tend to come from senior parts of the school, and early years, for whatever reason, is underrepresented, I would say, in general. As a standalone nursery setting, we're very lucky because we can cater directly for the needs of our 45 days old children right through to our 4-year-old children. But in some of the bigger systems, sometimes early years on the back foot.
Mike and I have been working quite a lot the last few years in that international way, haven't we, Mike? And you've been lobbying, the KHDA, working with ADEC, working with the Ministry of Education. Do you think that they are coming to more of an understanding of the importance of early years as well?
Absolutely, I think they are, and want to thank Sarah for all the work she's done as the first cash centre in the UAE, but also really spreading out the word of the UK early years framework and what that means to have qualified, licensed to practice practitioners working and teaching, from birth to 5, and then the management at level 5 and what that goes through. Because our mission at Cash and NCFE is to professionalise this sector, and that's what we're over many years, and I think they are. I think, you know, KHDA have been fantastic at recognising NCFE as a approved qualifications authority, making sure they're attesting those qualifications so that people are in those positions. So I do think it's getting there, but it's I think the case studies we've been able to develop from the work Sarah's done over there in the past lends itself. We have been, as Fiona's mentioned, we've been having conversations in China about what that British EYFS can look like and what we can do. So I think it's a slow process, but I definitely think it's getting there to show that this is a you know, a fantastic sector and a really professional and important one. So I do think it's slow steps, but we're definitely getting there.
Okay, brilliant. We're just going to finish in a few moments and take some questions in a few minutes. But just before we finish our discussion, what are the barriers? You know, let's think about what is our vision for the future if we want good early years provision for every child and every family, wherever they are, whatever they can afford. What is our vision, and are there any barriers to it? What can we do? God, this is a big question, isn't it? What can we do collectively as a profession to make it? Fiona, you have great resources at Wellington as well. You have a large organisation, a very, very well established traditional, you know, background of that quality. What can we do working together to promote early years?
I think that's a really good question. I think, you know, early years, I was about to say as well, in through schools, early years is really expensive. We have a lot of staff, we use a lot of stuff. I remember a principal or a master once saying to me, why do they use so much sound? So I guess, you know, there's a lot of disposable stuff in early years. So we do have to, I think we have to show that we are truly the foundations of learning, and that if you don't get it right before 7 years old, then you keep playing catch up. So I think absolutely, as Mike was saying, I think qualifications, recognised qualifications that are absolutely on the same par and the same standing as if you're a year 6 teacher. I think pathways are really important for early years practitioners, particularly again internationally, if they're local staff who start with you and want to go up that ladder, and why wouldn't they? I think there's another slight issue in international education, is that often local staff, if they are local nationals, are paid substantially less than our foreign teachers. Now, I know there's a reason for that, but then equally, you know, I've talked about in China, in our bilingual schools, over 50% of our staff are Chinese, and phenomenal bilingual teachers and TAs, and yet earn a lot less than that. So actually, if we want to attract, for instance, Vietnamese, Thai, Chinese nationals back to their countries to work with all that experience, then why then would we pay them less than a foreign teacher? And actually, I know there have been laws, and they're passed now in Dubai, and working with the government a while ago, to say that actually it's based on your qualification, not on your nationality, quite rightly. So I think that all of these things raise the bar. And again, coming from COVID, what great things like this to be able to network and connect without having to travel.
Yeah.
And, you know, so I think that's a real advantage.
I think we're going in the right direction, but Charlotte, what more can we do? How can we stand together to really, you know, really publicise or promote the importance of early years?
I think Fiona stole my word, actually. I did actually write in a little post-it networking. I think it's really key that no one succeeds as an island, and that people should be reaching out and connecting with each other more. I feel like that should be more at a local scale in terms of like early years practitioners connecting locally, but also in terms of being internationally minded, really, to look what other practices are going on around the world. Not that you can drag and drop a concept and put it into a place. One example of that is forest schools. You cannot apply the concept directly to a Dubai setting, but you can take elements of it which are fantastic and amazing and adapt it into our setting. So it's looking at that good practice, but how we can make it work in our setting.
Thank you. Mike, on a even wider scale, because you don't just deal with the UAE, you have centres across the region and across the world. Do you see early years, being promoted in those different countries as well, like in Qatar and, places like that you're working with?
Yeah, I think there's the success of what we've done in the UAE, and seeing that we have had some interest in Qatar, Oman, things like that, people wanting to take that and be able to say, look, we have been able to take a UK framework, have success, and show how it can drive quality and build that up through it. So we definitely have been seeing that. I would agree with what Fiona was saying. I think qualifications and pathways are really important, showing that this is a sector where you can have a full career. So you can maybe go in at a level 2, learn the ropes a little bit, find out what it is, move to your level 3 as a practitioner. Then if you can, move to level 5 as a, you know, an early years manager within that space, and how that would work. There's also the, you know, the need for special educational needs, SENCO, in different pathways in nutrition and health, whatever play work, whatever it may be. I think just continuing to professionalize the sector and allow those qualifications to develop is really important. But I think, as you mentioned as well, I think domestically and internationally, we need to almost set a bar where there is a leveling of pay, so that, you know, the staff going into these roles don't have to look for another job and don't need to move out of sector, because that's what I've heard. Parent hat on again, so many of Max's key workers have left, and not because they don't love early years, they do, they just simply can't afford to work within it. And that's really, really sad to see in the UK. So I think the more lobbying we can do as an organisation to try and change that, the better.
It's always going to be a hard one, isn't it? Because we are always going to need with ratios, and we haven't got time to go in that today. Maybe we'll just have to save on our sand, Fiona, and not spend some money on the sand. Okay, we're going to add questions in just a moment. I've seen some great questions coming through, and there's lots of people watching us from many different countries, which is fantastic. I think Danny's going to come back in because I can't see all of those questions. But just before we go to questions, is there anything, last things you want to say? Anybody? Is there anything we haven't covered? You're okay? I saw one of the questions about what was the scales you were talking about, love and scales. Can you say a little bit more about what those scales were, or maybe we can type that in?
Yeah, so the Leuven scale, so it's LEUVEN, are a set of measures, quality indicators, 1 to 5. 1's the lowest, 5's the highest, against well-being and against involvement. And very easy to use, but incredibly impactful. And if you I suppose I would urge anyone, don't just scratch the surface with them. If you can, get some training and use them, as I've said, as part of you know, as the golden thread to everything you do.
I would certainly recommend it. They're so accessible. They're so useful in every situation, as you said, whether they're on the bus, in the playground, in the classroom, and easy for everybody to understand. So that was really good. Danny, I couldn't see the rest of the questions. Could you see if there are any other questions for me, please? Some good comments.
Sure. There were a lot of comments, agreeing with what everyone was saying. We've had a couple of questions as well. I know you've all touched on this in different ways, but Maha Alajmi was asking, what is the best way, if there is a particular best way, I guess, to monitor quality in early years? I mean, I know that's a broad question.
We could be here for quite a long time. Charlotte, a quick answer to that. How do you monitor the quality in your setting?
I introduced last year one of our sort of peer mentor programs where teachers were developing each other. So that's one of my favourite ways really to check in on quality, is that staff don't feel as though they are being pressured from a leadership perspective, that they feel as though they can have open conversations and openly support each other as a staff, as opposed to the pressure coming from above.
Okay, that's good. Fiona, a concise answer to that huge question.
Triangulation. That's what I know. It's funny, I can see on one of the comments, there's one of our ex-teachers who's left us, who was fantastic, Justin. We didn't want him to leave, but he wanted to go and live in Malaysia. So he will laugh when I say triangulation. But yeah, so just using data, and by data, I don't mean just numbers. I mean information about children, about the quality of teaching, about what children say, what parents say, and bringing it all together. So if you're like in the middle of that triangle, there are those maximum conditions for learning, and you can see if they all fit together, but then you can identify the barrier to improving more. And I would say if there's anything, I suppose, something that always helps, as you said, that relationship between, it's not just top down, it's not being checked, it's self-evaluations or peer monitoring. It's about really clear standards. So people knowing what in your mind, as a team, agreeing what good looks like, what does very good look like, what does excellent look like. So it's not, so it's meaningful. If not, it's just just a tick in a box, you know.
100% having that ethos where everybody works as a team together and everybody understands. Would you agree with that, Mike?
Absolutely, yes. Again, from an awarding point of view, I think it's that qualification development as well. Once you can see that the staffing in an early years environment are qualified to a certain level, that gives a confidence that they are working to that vocational level and they're working to that standard. And then following that, it is the constant CPD, that continuing professional development that they keep updated. So we know they're working towards the latest standard, keeping those CPD logs up to date, so that anyone from the manager to anyone in that setting knows where we are within that. I would agree with that.
And we've certainly seen, I've seen in my experience that when staff do get qualified, especially when they do it off their own, you know, back and pay for it themselves, they bring those great standards into the nursery. They share, they talk about colleagues, have those professional discussions as well. So that's really good. I just saw that question from Justin, I think it was about problems with COVID. What children coming back in with COVID? Or some of you were saying, Fiona, you said it wasn't too bad for you.
Not in China. Not in China, I would say, but speaking to head teachers here in England, it has been a huge issue, particularly with communication and language. Not physical development so much, but communication and language. They've found children have been, in terms of ages and stages, have struggled and are catching up. But communication and language, much more than literacy, all the other things you would think about, that's been their real challenge.
Charlotte, would you agree with that in your experience?
Yeah, I think one of our biggest challenges is, or not so much now, but definitely when nurseries reopened, it was, like Mike mentioned earlier, was children having the confidence to socialise with new people and to move in new environments. That was our biggest challenge, I'd say.
Just looking at the questions here as well, Danny, I'm not sure if you've got ones above, but there's a question here. I have a two-part question from Sidra. Are UAE nurseries ready to broaden their network, and what can we do to improve it? I'm quite sure what she means by broaden the network. Maybe does she mean like, well, Charlotte, obviously you're a part of a big network, and Fiona, you're part of a big network. Maybe she means that, or maybe she just...
Or maybe across networks. I definitely feel like there's something that we could put in the pipeline there.
I certainly think as a early years profession, we network, and you both said about networking, we do share better now. We share our best practice much better. We have these professional discussions much better, don't we? What are the best tools of measuring quality? Oh, goodness. We could definitely be here all day. I think that's a very personal thing as well. Is there something in your mind that stands out, Charlotte or Fiona?
Measuring quality in terms of...
It doesn't say, it just says measuring quality. So it could be quality of practice. We talked about monitoring practice. It could be quality of teaching, quality of learning.
I mean, I think Charlotte, I think any assessment should reflect your values, shouldn't it? And if you know, I always say to people, when these children leave, what do you want them to be? What do you want them to be like? And so if you want them to be independent, then when you're measuring quality, then watch for independence. And if everyone's being fed and served, then we're not, you know, that you know, my vision of quality hasn't been matched. So I think it reflects what you believe to be the right for young children.
And I think in the revised EYFS, and I know not everybody follows that, but that very much is about saying professional judgment, isn't it? Using professional judgment. So we don't need to be ticking boxes. And when I did some work for Ofsted, it was like, tell me what it is like for a child in your setting. It is not about lots and lots of paperwork. So definitely. Danny, I can't see any questions higher up. We've only got a couple more minutes. Are there anything higher up that we could address?
Sure. We've had a couple of questions on hiring. One in particular from Nancy, asking, how do you deal with staff members who request higher positions on the basis of degree qualification only and not personality skills? Some staff members are quantified on paper, but not on experience or people skills. So that's an interesting one that I'll leave the floor open to.
Fiona, would you like to answer that one? I can almost imagine your answer. Go on.
It's hard because if you've got a salary pay scale, there's two sides of it, aren't there? In one way, we're talking, as we were, Mike, about pathways, and we know what happened with the early professional status years ago in England, is that great nursery managers went and paid all that money to go and get degrees, which is great, and yet they weren't paid any more for it. in their setup because they could afford it. And so we lost lots of those amazing nursery managers to be teaching assistants in school because they were paid more for that. So I suppose it's about clarity, isn't it? It's about clarity ahead of people taking courses. But I do think if you've got an entry salary scale according to qualifications, it's tricky.
Yeah, it is. Is there time for one more question in our last minute? Is there anything else, Danny? I can.
Let me see. We've had a comment from Basima, just saying that she'd like to add to what Charlotte was saying about SLT members, how they should take part in the teaching process at least once a week or once every 2 weeks. In this case, they can know what gaps exactly need to be covered and how to apply strategies they did in middle and high school in an early years class. So I don't know, Charlotte, if you'd like to add anything to that, please feel free.
Yeah, I mentioned before about people who are leading the K-12 system schools, just that they possibly should be dipping down into early years classrooms as much as the higher level students.
Definitely. And from the comments, I can see that connection between Key Stage 1 or higher up and early years is a really good connection, isn't it? It's really good. Okay. I think, is there anything else? There's quite a lot of lovely people saying thank you very much. So I think I will just close then. So thank you to the panel. Thank you to Mike and Fiona and Charlotte very much for being here today and having this fantastic discussion with me. I've really enjoyed talking to you. Thank you for Danny for organising it, and Sarah behind the scenes as well, keeping us on track, even if Mike did go pink. Sorry, Mike.
Sorry about that, everyone. Thank you. I'm going to keep the hot pink going there for the rest of the week.
But for me, early years is a passion, and having such passionate people who are really committed to quality is really, really pleasing, and together we can make a difference. So thank you very much, and thank you, Danny.
Perfect. Well, from our side as well, we'd like to thank you so much. That was really brilliant and very informative. And if anyone from the audience, I know we've still had a few questions that we couldn't cover, unfortunately, due to time, but for any further questions, or if you'd like to connect with our speakers, please send an email to marketing@gesseducation.com. You'll also be redirected to a short survey once we end the webinar, so please tell us what you thought and if there are any topics you'd like to hear about in the future. And if you've enjoyed this webinar, and it really looks like everyone has, and the valuable insight that our guests shared today, it only gets better because they can see you all at GESS Dubai. They'll all be able to meet you in person in less than 2 months at GESS Dubai from the 15th to the 17th of November, where they'll be delivering some really inspiring sessions. So for more information and to register for free for all 3 days of CPD accredited conference content and an exhibition with hundreds of globally renowned brands, please visit www.guestdubai.com. We'd love to see you all there. A massive thank you to our panel and also you, our audience. We hope that you found this discussion beneficial, and stay tuned as we'll be announcing our next upcoming webinar very soon. Take care and bye-bye for now.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.